How's it going, everyone? I am Jeremy Alexander, and welcome back to a Flappy Bird clone. Now, I know what you're thinking, so just wait a second here. We are going to be upgrading an existing Flappy Bird clone that has been done before. And I know that Flappy Bird is a very popular game that's been around for a while, and it's very popular to clone because technically you can write it in 15, 18, 20 lines of code or less. But I still think that it is relevant to make an updated version of it and just to make it hopefully a little bit more feasible for you to actually make a nice Flappy Bird clone. So let me show you the Flappy Bird clone that we're going to go off of, but I'm telling you, and I'm going to show you what I've already made so you can see what our finished product is going to look like. Now, if you haven't already seen Make Your Own Flappy Bird Game in 10 Minutes by Tom, who is a Skira co-founder, then you should definitely go check it out because this is pretty much what we're going to be going off of. However, I did have to make a few updates to it just to kind of fix some bugs that I found, and I updated the art altogether. So basically, if you want to go to this page, you can, and you can download this file, and you can kind of go off of that without having to do much. But I am going to be kind of redoing the file, so there's not much point in downloading it since we're pretty much going to be redoing it. So here's what we're going to make, and now I'm going to not talk so you can hear the music. Oops. Hold on, I died. Okay, so hopefully you get the point. We're updating it to have a monster in there, and it's going to be just a little bit updated with a cool effects and sound and just anything else that you might need for the game. Now, there's a lot of other updates that you could do for this, but for right now, we're just going to get this done. So here's what we're going to do. If you haven't already downloaded, download the resources file in the description below, or you can find it on my YouTube channel probably, but just check it out if it's in there. We're also using free music from Kevin McLeod at Incompetech, which is really cool. And then I made some sound effects and I made some art for us. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to say File New, and we're going to make a new retro style project. We're going to get rid of this, and we're going to switch our layout to actually be exactly what Tom had it at 500. Oops, that's not 500. 500 by 400, and we're going to do the same for our properties. We're going to go 500 by 400 for our window size. Or do I have it backwards? I do have it backwards. I was right the first time. 400 by 500. So let's do that. 400 by 500. Cool. So now let me actually go to my project properties here, and there's a few things I like to do. I'm going to turn pixel rounding off just because I always like to do that since I don't want my objects to snap at integers. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change my full screen in browser. He has it where you turn it to off in the tutorial, and that'll create a Construct 2 border around it, which is cool. I'm going to put this to letterbox scale because for the sake of this tutorial, I'm going to preview in NWJS, which is Node WebKit, which makes it applicable for the desktop. So now if I hit play here and if I run our layout, you can see that I have this, which just kind of loads up our entire window and our entire layout there. Cool. So now what I need to do is I need to actually import our assets. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to double click and make a new sprite, and I'm going to open it up in the folder here. Well, let me go find the folder that I made for us. And now that I found the folder, I'm going to import the background first. That way we just kind of have the background taken care of. So in the background here, what I want to do is I want to kind of conform this background to this. And the other thing that he has here, and I know that a lot of people don't know what these are, this is just extra space, these little corners here to have objects outside. These are your margins. And we can actually just turn those off, or we could put them down to really low. We could put them to 0 by 0, and you can see that they're pretty much gone. We could put them to 10 by 10. Maybe we'll put them to, let's put them to 50 and 50. There we go. And what we're going to do here is we're just going to kind of stretch this out, not from there. We're going to stretch it out diagonally, and that way we can just kind of put this in here like so. Let's see. Maybe I'll kind of squeeze it down a little bit. And there's our background. Now this is layer 0, so let's click on layer 0 and let's change the transparency to yes, because now that we actually have a background image, we don't need a background color. So let's put that there, and let's actually just make sure that this is over our layout size, our canvas here. And let me move this over like that. Cool. So that should work perfectly for our backgrounds. Let's rename this, and let's call this our background layer. And then let's rename this sprite to be our object background, and then let's lock this layer. Cool. So now that we have that done, let's add a new layer. Let's double click and go to our sprite here, and let's open up our folder and let's import our monster. So let's zoom in on our monster here, And let's go to our collisions first. Let's right click and set it to bounding box. So this will be our collision. So technically this is where we can actually collide with the pipes. And if you don't want it to collide, you know, like right around here, then you can just start to move it down like this. So it'll actually collide when it hits. But for right now, I want this to collide at the bounding box for these sprites. And something else I can do is I can hit crop to see if it'll just crop a little bit more. And there we go. So now our collision's a little bit better. I'm going to set the origin to the middle. Now you could set this anywhere you want. We are going to be rotating this, so it'll rotate from the origin point. So just keep that in mind. Let's exit out of this and let's zoom in over here, kind of drag this onto our scene. And let's call this our object monster. Cool. Now the only thing we have to do is we actually have to add a behavior, and we're going to add a platform behavior to our guy here. And we're going to turn the max speed off because all we're going to be doing is we're going to be clicking him up and down, and the background is going to be moving. Not this background, but our pipes will be moving towards us. He's going to be staying still. So we're going to turn that off. I think we can turn off the jump strength altogether. We can leave everything else on, I believe, max fall speed and stuff like that. I don't think we need to change anything else. Let me think. We might want to put down the acceleration, and I guess we could put down the fall speed. Actually, we want the fall speed on, don't we? We need the fall speed the most. We can actually bump that up. Let's bump that up to 1200, and let's put the acceleration down, like just from Tom's tutorial, we could put it down to 300. That way we don't have that much acceleration going on. Okay, so let me hit save, and let me actually, you know what? You hit save. I'm not going to save this at the moment. Let me hit run, and let's see what's going on. Cool. So because we have our platformer object here, and because we don't have a speed, we're just kind of falling to the ground with our gravity. So we're going to need to fix that. And let's actually just finish importing our assets before anything else. Let's rename this to entities, like I always do. Let's double click and add a new sprite here. And we're going to hit open, and we're going to open our monster pipe. Now I'm going to hit crop just to see if it'll crop a little bit. And I'm also going to leave this in the middle. I want this origin point to be there. I need to make sure that this is set to bounding box. This is very important because you kind of just, you can have it form to your pipe, and you might find that that's what you want to do. But having it at bounding box will be a lot easier for the other bounding box to actually collide with it. Now, if later down the road it really is impacting how you play the game, then feel free to change it. So I'm going to exit out of this, and I'm going to zoom out here, and I'm going to actually put this down here. And the reason I can't pan is because I put our margins down, but that's okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually call this our object bottom pipe. Cool, so this is our bottom pipe here, and what we want to do with our bottom pipe is we want to have an instance variable. And in this instance variable, we want to know if we have scored. So has the player scored? Has scored. And we're going to change the type of this to Boolean. So every time, what we're going to do in a minute is when this is over this, we're going to find out if that is true or false. Now, we're almost done setting up our layout here. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to right click and clone this. I'm going to call this object top pipe. Now, because I cloned it, I can actually have a separate instance of it that won't be affected at all. And technically this has the has scored as well. So let me get rid of that altogether because this one doesn't need to have it. Only this one does. And because it's a clone, it's completely on its own. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to open up the sprite, and I'm actually just going to hit flip. That way it's our top pipe, and exit out. So now we have a top pipe, and I can put this up here like so. And then finally, let's lock this layer, and let's add a new layer. And let's rename this one to be our HUD. And actually, let's add one more layer as well for our SFX. And just like this, we want our SFX to be on top of our HUD. And what we're going to do actually is go back into the entities layer, double click, and add a new sprite for our tile backgrounds. And just kidding, since they're tile backgrounds, they're not sprites. Let's delete that. And I can delete that from my objects from my entire project. Let's double click and add a new tiled background. And let's open that up again. Let's go for tile background 1, and let's exit out. And now we kind of have to set this up a little bit here. It shouldn't be that bad. What we need to do is we just need to kind of get it to right there. And we're going to put this like this. And I'm going to kind of just, you know, just make it a little bigger there. And let's actually call this object TB1. Let's double click and add a new tiled background. And let's call this one tiled background 2 and put this in there. and do the same thing. And these are just basically what these tile backgrounds need to do, since our player isn't going to be moving left and right, and it's just going to be actually kind of, what's the word? It's just going to be standing right there, and our background is going to be scrolling towards us. We want to have these there just to kind of scroll with the player, so it doesn't look, I mean, we don't need to have these here. These are pretty much purely decorational, but it would look a little funny without them. I mean, you can totally have them that way, and I don't blame you if you do want to have it that way, because my art is not the best. And yes, I did draw this, and I'm sorry if it's not that great, but hopefully it is a little bit of a step up here. So, okay, so I think we have our tile backgrounds. Let me call this one object tile background 2 and hit OK there. And I think we are good to go. I keep hitting save. So make sure you save your project. Let's rename this to our game layout, and let's rename this to our game event. And let's save your project, and I'll come back in a second after I do that. All right, so now that we have our project saved, let's go to our game event and let's get started. So what we're going to do is we're going to add an event for our system start of layout. So let's go to our start of layout here. And what we're going to say is a few things. We're going to be resetting the position of our tiled backgrounds. So let's do that. Let's actually say add action for object tiled background 1, and let's set the X to 0. There it is. Set the X of tile background 1 to 0. So where is this at right now? Let's look at our position here, and this is at -52, but if I put this to 0, you can see that that's where it's going to be putting it. So let me actually put this back to where I want it to be, right around here. And then let's also do the same for the next one. Let's copy and paste this code, and let's actually hit R on the keyboard, and let's replace it with object tiled background 2. So now both of these will be reset there. Let's hit play on our layout here, and we can see that they're reset. And now I see that my let me actually put these margins. Let me make them a little bit bigger here so I can actually move around the screen. You can see here that this has got some, I don't think that it has, okay, yeah, I was like, wait a second, this is a tile background. We just need to make this, there we go, a little bit smaller so it's not showing, and let's put this right there as well. Let's kind of get this at the bottom of the layout there so that it looks kind of like a carpet and kind of like brick, I don't know, brick, whatever I intended it to be, cement or stone or whatever. So there we go. Okay, that looks a lot better. And it's going to always set its X to 0 on the start of the layout. Now that we have that, let's actually make some global variables. So let's hit V on the keyboard, and the first global variable we want to make is called score. So let's call this score, and this is straight from the 10-minute tutorial. And what we're going to do is we're just going to leave it as 0 and hit OK. But then what we want to do is we want to make some constants, and these are variables that will never change value ever. So let's hit that. Let's hit the constant checkbox, and let's call this one our scroll speed. And let's actually change this to 5. Hopefully you remember this from the actual tutorial there, the 10-minute tutorial. And let's do this again. Let's hit V on the keyboard. Let's click the constant checkbox, and let's call this one our seconds per obstacle. Now it's automatically going to make it caps because it's constant, so that's your way of knowing. And seconds per obstacle is just going to be our variable to hold for our every X seconds later on when we actually need to spawn a new pipe. So let's give this 1 second per obstacle. And let's hit V on the keyboard again, and let's hit this one as jump strength. So even though we turned our jump strength off, we're still going to have some jump strength, and in this case it's going to be constant, and it's going to be 500. So our jump strength will never change, neither will our scroll speed or our seconds per obstacle. Now technically you don't have to make the seconds per obstacle a constant, and you can kind of space it however you want, or you can always edit the constant. So this could be, 2 seconds for every pipe speed or pipe creation to come about. Okay. So what we're going to do now in our start of layout is we're going to go to our system, and we're going to set the value, I'm going to type and set the value of our score to be 0, which will always make sure that when we start the layout, when we restart, it'll always go back to 0. Then what I want to do is I'm going to set this up now just because it'll help us out later on. We have this SFX layer that I'm just going to put one thing of effects on for now, but what I want to do is I want to go system, and I want to say layer visibility. And I want to type in SFX, and I want to change the visibility of visible to invisible, and hit OK. Cool. Now, I think we are pretty much good to go on our start of layout. So let's group this together, and let's call this our game start. And let's put that in there. Cool. So now that we have our game start, let's add our monster movement here. So now what we need to do is we need to add the event to our mouse. And I'm going to do this for desktop for now, and maybe later on we can add it for mobile. It's not very hard to just go back and change everything for mobile, or just add that in as an additional option. But what we want to do is on our mouse on any click. So we don't want to limit it to the left click, right click, or the middle mouse button. We want to make sure that we can use all of that. So on any click, what we're going to do is we're actually going to use the platform behavior from our monster, and we're going to set the vector X. So let's do that. Let's add the action to our monster to set the vector, not the vector X, the vector Y. Let's set the vector Y to -500. So in this case, it'll be negative, our constant negative jump strength. So now let me hit save, and now let me hit run. And let's watch what happens. Cool. So now every single time when we're just falling, since we have no speed, every time we click, we're setting it back to -500. Now this is different from our independent X position. So let me hit debug here. Let me show you. As soon as the debug wants to load, I will hopefully, there we go. Okay, so I think I'm gonna have to restart this again. Let me hit restart, and then let me hit pause. So let's grab our object monster here. And we have our own X position on the layout. We also have our own vector Y position. And since we're never actually moving our vector X left and right, since our speed is 0, and we're not using the arrow keys at all, we're only controlling the Y position. And since we have gravity at 1500, no jump strength and no speed, it's just going to fall. So when we click, every time we click, let me hit resume here. Every time we click, you can see our vector Y going up, but you can also see that our vector Y is completely different from our Y position in the layout. It's just our actual platform to actually control the X and the Y of the platform behavior. I hope that makes sense to you, and I hope you're understanding that this vector Y is different from our Y position in the layout, and every time we set this to -500, it's just going to bump it up another -500 pixels, which in this case is going up, not down. All right, so let's exit out of this, and let's look at what we need to do next. The next thing on that tutorial is we need to actually set the angle. So if I do this, if I go to our monster and I set our angle to, it really doesn't matter what we set it to. I can set it to 320, which is in the tutorial. I can also set it to, I don't want to hit insert. I can also set it to 350. It really is up to you. So I'm gonna set it to 320 so you can see what it does. Now when we jump, you can see that we're actually tilting upwards, which is really cool, because it's going to give us that more Flappy Bird-like effect where we're actually flapping our wings. So what we're going to do next is we're actually going to come up with a way to flap downwards, or just to go down. Now I do have an additional frame to add to our monster if you really want to, but I'm not going to do that right now. I think this effect kind of works itself out for me, for my purpose here, but I think that'll be a good challenge for you to add into your own game if you wanted to. So what we're going to do is we're going to compare the angle. Since we already know that it's at 320 degrees, we want to compare and see what we can do. And this is hint, hint, where you might actually want to change the animation. But here's what we're going to do. We're going to compare between 1, and all I did was what I went into our monster is between angles. We're going to compare between 1 and 360. So we're going to cover everything. And in it, we're going to set the angle again. So let's control click this down. And what we're going to do is we're going to set it to itself. So whatever angle it's currently at, it could be at 320, it could be less than that. We're going to say whatever angle it's at, so self.angle, that's an update from the 10-minute tutorial right there. But what we're going to do is we're going to add 60 to it. Now, technically, you could also add 90. It doesn't really matter. And then we're going to add some frame rate independence here, so we make sure that this runs on every single platform no matter what. And we're going to multiply it by the times delta time. And if you don't know what delta time is, there's a great article from the other Skira founder, Ashley, on delta time. And I don't even want to begin to explain it right now because there's a lot of stuff in there that is just really helpful. But basically, it's our frame rate independence. So by adding it there, when I hit play now, we're not going to drop any frames. And now we can also see that we're kind of going backward, like we're kind of dipping back down. Now I wonder what happens here if I just kind of increase this number to a whole lot here, and just to kind of mess around with it. But there you go. You can see the extreme difference here. I didn't do that originally, but you can see how much that's going to dip down if you let go. Cool. So I'm going to put that back, or maybe I'll just put it down to like 70 or something and mess around with it a little bit more. But now we actually have our player. Our monster's actually flapping, essentially. And that's pretty much our movement. Now there is one update that I wanted to make here, and I actually already imported the sounds. So what you're going to do is you're going to right click import sounds, and you're just going to grab all of our sound effects here. Now I already did that. And what I wanted to do was I wanted to add the action to our audio, and I wanted to hit play, and I wanted to pick our monster jump and hit OK. And this is the action that we're going to add. But what I found kind of with all of my Construct 2 projects, I only want to trigger the audio once, and I never want to run into that bug where something happens and something gets stuck and it just keeps playing sound. That's a very annoying bug. So to fix this, I hit B on this event right here on our AnyClick. I'm going to double click, go to System, and type in Trigger, just to hit TR to pull up the trigger once. And now I know that this audio is only going to play once every single time I click. So let me hit save, and let me hit play. And now hopefully you can hear that audio. All right, it's coming together because now it actually feels like a Flappy Bird clone. So let me hit G on the keyboard to bring up our group. Let's call this our monster movement and hit OK. And let's select all of this, and now there we go. We have both of our groups done. Now comes the fun part, and what we get to do here is we actually get to add our collision. So let's double click onto our player. Let's go to our monster object here, and we want to check to see if it's overlapping another object. And if it is, what's going to happen? So what we want to do is we want to pick all of our overlaps, so when our player hits it, it's going to subsequently die. So we're going to pick the bottom pipe to start with and hit OK. Then we're going to copy the condition, not the whole event, and I'm going to hit Control C and Control V, and I'm going to change this object to be the top. Then I'm going to hit Control C, I'm going to hit Control V again, and I want to check to see if I'm hitting the actual tiled background. And then I want one more condition, and this is from the tutorial as well, where you actually hit, we're going to have to take this entire event here, we're going to have to hit C, and we're going to hit Object Monster, and we're going to find to see if it's outside the layout. Now, this is different from what we do in the tutorial because they have these as separate events. I would prefer to do this where I select the event and I hit Y on the keyboard to make them all OR. I want this to be an OR statement, so if this is overlapping bottom pipe, or this is overlapping top pipe, or this is overlapping tiled background 1, or it's outside the layout, then we're going to call the destroy function. That's also a new update here, so let's do that. Let's go double click, and let's type in function, and let's enter that into our project here. And really, we could also put in tiled background 2, but I don't think that'll ever get to that point, so we don't need to, but that is an additional check that you could put in. And what we're going to do now is we're going to actually create our functions for our monster death, essentially. And we're probably going to have to disable this a few times just so we can do some debugging here. But what we're going to do is we're going to double click and make a new function. And we're going to call this function monster death func. And in the monster death func, what we're going to do is we're actually just going to go to our monster and hit destroy. Now later on, you can always update this to actually do something less than destroy, where it would actually maybe fall down to the ground, or it would, do other things like call the main menu or something like that if you had one. But right now, I just want to get this to work a little bit differently. So there's other things that we're going to have to add to our monster death function here. But what I really want to do is I want to just say system wait. And I want the system to wait 1 second here. And after a second, what I want it to do is I want it to restart. So let's go system and let's type in restart layout. Cool. So now what we want to do is we want to go to our action here for our collision, and we want to actually go to our function, call the function monster death function. Okay, cool. So now if we're overlapping any of these things, then we are going to die essentially here. So let's actually hit save, let's hit play, and let's watch this happen right there. So we get destroyed and we restart the layout. And there's nothing really fun happening there yet because we actually don't have a way to figure out if we're hitting anything, if there's any sound going on, or what the deal is with that. So let's actually add sound to our project here. And to do that, we're going to have to go back up here. So let me make a new group here. Let's hit G for our function. Let's call this our game functions. And let's put this to the top. That way we can actually see what's going on. And what I want to do here is just the same that I did with our with our monster movement here. I want to do the same thing for this. I want to hit B on the keyboard to make a blank sub event. And in that sub event, I want to go system trigger once while true. Now, while this is true, I want it to actually play our monster collision sound. So let's go audio play, and let's type in, it already knows, monster collision, and hit OK. So now when I hit save, and now when I hit play, you can hear our really wonderful collision sound. Cool. And again, this is colliding via the box collider. We can go here and we can turn on our collision polys, and you can see where it's actually colliding. So if it looks a little funny, that is up to you to change, but I think it looks fine for what it is. And it's colliding and it's destroying. And you can also wait a second before it actually destroys the object to actually remove it. So if it's a little too abrupt, you can do that for yourself. Cool. So now we actually can group this as our monster collisions. And we might as well do one more thing here. We might as well put all of this in here, and we might as well just make a group for our monster. And I put that in there. But what I really wanted is to put all of these two groups into there. Cool, so let's hit save. And what we're going to do next is we're actually going to make a way for our backgrounds to scroll, and then a way for our monster to actually, to start with our scrolling, we're actually going to move our tiled backgrounds. Now our tiled backgrounds are there to really help illustrate these pipes moving and to illustrate the motion of the object rather than just having these two pipes there. So what we're going to do is we're going to add the event for our tiled background, and let's actually do it for tiled background 1. And tiled background 1, what we want to know is we want to know if our x is less than -40 or if our x is less than negative whatever it was, 560 or something like that. Essentially what this is doing is it's taking this tiled background and it's setting the x position to whatever you want off of the screen. So it's going to be like -560 is going to be over there. So if it gets over there, then it's going to snap back to 0. Let me hit Control Z. And the other one I believe that he used was if the x is at -410, then it's going to kind of go over there. It could also be 560. It really doesn't matter. But this is what we're going to use just as a basic way to snap it back to 0. And since it's a tiled background, it'll always look like it's seamlessly looping. So to set this up, we're going to go to our tiled background 1, and we're going to actually compare the x. We're going to type in compare x. And what we're going to do is we want to know if it's less than or equal to that number. So I think it was -560, I said. No, for this one, it'll be negative. It doesn't really matter. We'll go for -560 and hit OK. For tiled background 1, if the x is less than -560, and honestly these numbers could kind of be the same, but I guess it would look a little bit more robotic than natural. And what we're going to do really is we're just going to set itself back to 0. So we're going to go to our tiled background 1, and we're going to set the x back to 0. Let me copy and paste this, and let me hit R on this condition and change it to tiled background 2. And let me hit R again and change that one to tiled background 2. Now, I think we're going to change this one to exactly like how Tom had it in the tutorial, to -410, just so we kind of keep with it. But I really don't believe that that is a deal breaker there if you change those values around. But okay, so I hit play here a little prematurely, but all we're doing is when these things move, we actually have to make them move, which we're going to do in a second here. Let's hit G on the keyboard here, and let's call this our scrolling, let's call this our scrolling backgrounds, and hit OK. And what we want to do is we want to put all of these in there, but we actually, let's put both of these in there, but we actually want to make this kind of a little bit more grouped together, and I'll show you in a second what I mean by that. So to actually make these things move and to actually make our pipes eventually move, we need something to do it every single second. And usually what I do is in my game start, I have a start of layout and I have an every tick. So every frame that the game is running, have it do this. And this comes in handy for animations and stuff like that, but it's also going to come in handy right here for our scrolling backgrounds. So we're going to say system every tick. And in the every tick, I'm going to put it into our scrolling backgrounds. What we want to do is we actually want to make these tiled backgrounds move. So to do this, we're going to use our scroll speed constant. So every single second, what we're going to do is we're going to go to our tiled background and we're going to set the x position to itself, essentially. So whatever it's at, we're going to say self.x, and then we're going to subtract 5. We're going to subtract scroll speed and hit OK. And I'm going to copy and paste this, and I'm going to hit R on the keyboard, and I'm going to do the same thing for object tiled background 2. Let me hit save, and let me hit play. And now you should actually see it subtracting 5 from the x every single second. And that might almost be too fast. You could actually change the scroll speed to something a little bit less if you really wanted to. But because we're using the scroll speed here, we're also going to use it for our pipes. So you might want to make it separate. You might want to have a tiled background scroll speed and a pipe scroll speed. So what we're going to do is we're going to make the exact same thing. We're going to control click. So I'm going to hold down shift, control C, control V, and I'm going to replace the object. Actually, it's not going to let me do that because I haven't defined the object yet. So I'm just going to click here and go back. And I'm going to take the actual bottom pipe and hit next and then hit done. And now if I copy that and paste that and hit R, it should give me the opposite pipe there because it's set up what it needed to do there. So just a construct 2 quirk there, but now we actually have all of that set up. So if I hit play, you're actually not going to see anything because actually you'll see 1 because that's what we have on the layout. Which reminds me, let's actually go to this object and let's add the behavior of destroy outside layout. Otherwise, we would have so many different pipes being created that our program will slow down. So we're not destroying these because we're just resetting the position of these, but we are destroying these because what we're going to do is we're going to create them over and over and over again. So what I want to do here is I kind of want to nest this even further a little bit here, and I think that this would be a good idea, but I realized that let's do that. Let's actually take this and let's hit Control G, and let's hit G, not Control G, and let's call this our generation scrolling, just something neutral there. And let me put this up here. Generation scrolling makes sense to me. Where to go? Let me put this outside of the groups, and let me put scrolling backgrounds in there. And the reason why I want to do this is because in a minute we're going to be disabling this group, and we're probably going to disable the master version of this group here. So we can actually just call this generation master generator. Okay, so enough talking, let's just continue with the game. So what we're going to do for this is we're actually going to create a way for these pipes to actually, be spawned and called and actually be random. So here's how we're going to do that. We're going to do this very similar to the tutorial that you have already seen, hopefully the 10-minute tutorial. So we're going to say system every X seconds, and this is what I was talking about before. We're going to say every seconds per obstacle, so every 1 second, what is going to happen? Every 1 second, we want to actually create these objects. So what we're going to do is we're going to go system create object, and the first object we want to create is our top pipe. So let's say top pipe, and we can create this on layer 0. It doesn't really matter what layer we create it on. Actually, you know what? I'm going to create it on our entities layer where we have it. And on our entities layer, we're going to set the X and the Y position to always be created on. And the X position is always going to be at 400. That way it's going to be the same for the X for the top pipe and the bottom pipe, but the Y position for the top pipe is going to be different. In this case, we're going to randomize it between 50 on the Y and negative 250. And if I hit OK there, if I hit save and if I hit play, you can see what's going to happen now is it's going to randomly create it at different Y positions. But the X position is always going to stay the same. The X position is always going to be at 400. Let me type that in so you can see where it's going to be. The X position is always going to be there, so it's essentially just going to be like this a bunch of times at different Y positions, something like that. Cool. So now that we have that done, let me actually hit Control Z one more time. What we're going to do is we're going to put this into a group, and we're going to call this obstacle generator. And I'm going to put this into our generation master. And I'm going to move these around just a little bit for my own organizational purposes. I'm not going all out by organizing this in subfolders and whatnot, so I'm just going to kind of group these together to an extent. And what we're going to do now is we're going to copy this, so Control C, and we're going to double click and change the object from the top to the bottom. And for the bottom, we don't need to randomize it. We don't need to do that at all. But what we do want to do is we want to know where our top pipe was randomized. So to find where our top pipe was randomized, we're going to say top pipe. Let me type that in, object underscore top pipe dot Y plus 700. That's what we want to do for our bottom pipe, and it's going to kind of move that around randomly. So if I hit play now, you can actually see that every 1 second, it's going to move it 700 pixels either up or down, wherever the actual top pipe is being created. Cool. So now that we have that, we're actually going to we haven't added our score yet, so I don't need to put that in there yet, but this is where we're going to actually be updating our score a little bit. But I'm not sure if that's even necessary. The one thing I do want to check here is our Boolean. So if you remember, we actually have a has scored Boolean right here. So our generation is done, and now we need to move on to our scoring. So to do this, we're actually going to set our scoring every 1 second to false. So no matter what it was, we're going to set it to false. And this is where I found a pretty big bug in the original version here, and I don't think that it has anything to do with the original version. I think it was just I don't even know. It was just something that wasn't being triggered correctly. So what we want to do here is we want to set the Boolean has scored to false, because we're going to be setting it to true somewhere else. So let me minimize this. Let me minimize our generation master here. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a way for us to score. Now, to actually score, we need to find a way for our player to pass over our pipe. So what we're going to do is we're going to add an event for our pipe, for our bottom pipe in particular, since it's always going to be at 400 and stuff like that. We can actually get it to compare to our player a lot easier. So we're going to say compare the x of our pipe, and we want to know if it's less than or equal to. And we want to know if it's less than or equal to our object monster.x. Now, this is the part that I was kind of having a little bit of trouble with, and I was running into this bug because we're always going to need to check. We're not going to add a sub event. We're going to hit C on the keyboard to add another condition. We're always going to need to check if the bottom pipe's Boolean has scored is not true. So I'm adding the Boolean is set, and this right now is saying that it is true. So I need to hit I on the keyboard to invert it to see if it's not true. So if this Boolean that object pipe has is not true, and if the object pipe's x is less than or equal to the object monster.x, then we're going to make a new function. So let's go to our game functions here, and I like to do it this way. I'm going to hit B on the keyboard and drag this up and double click and make a new function here, and I'm going to call this monster score function. Cool. So on our monster score function, what we need to do is we need to actually register that we have scored, and we actually need a way to make sure that this gets set to true at some point. So what we want to do here is we want to actually set that first. Let's go to our pipe. Let's set the Boolean of has scored to true, and then let's also add 1 to our score variable. So let's add to score 1 and hit OK. So let me hit save there, and what we want to do here is simply call the function. So let's go to our function, call function, and let's call monster score function. I realize now that I haven't actually added in a text object or a sprite font for us to actually keep the score. So let's do that now. Let's go to our HUD layer and let's double click and let's add a new sprite font and hit OK. And let's exit out of this. And you can use whatever sprite font you want to use. I'm going to call this object score. And I think I'm going to update this sprite font to one of my own custom sprite fonts, which you can eventually grab on the Skira store, but feel free to use whatever you'd like. The one thing I want to do here is I want to change the scale from 1 to 5, and I need to drag this down a whole lot so you can see what's going on. Then I want to actually set the horizontal alignment to center, and then I want to actually drag this over our canvas, something like this, like right over the door here. And what I really want to do is I want to actually change the initial text from the words text to be the number 0. Cool. So this should work perfectly fine. I might change this in a bit to my own sprite font here, but if we hit play now, we should have pretty much the start of our game here. Like we already can die and restart. We already have sounds, and now we have our simple sprite font HUD installed. So cool. Let's lock our HUD layer so we don't actually click on that. And let's go back to our game functions here, and let's make sure that that'll actually go up. So what we want to do here is we want a way to actually make that go up in value. We want it to always, or we already made it go up in value. We want to make sure that it actually is triggering that every single second. So where do we know where we have an every tick event? Now, usually it's not there. Where is it? It's in here. It's in our scrolling backgrounds. And maybe I want to make an edit, and I want to say our every tick is in here so I don't forget. But usually I have this up top so I know where it is. And in our every tick, I'm just going to tag on a way for our sprite font to always set the score. So I'm going to go to our sprite font object, and I'm going to set the text to equal score, the score variable. So I'm going to hit save, and I'm going to hit play. And now I'm going to see if this works, and hopefully I won't die. Cool. So you can see it going up 1, 2, 3. And what I was having an issue with was it was triggering it too soon. It was kind of triggering it before the actual pipe was approaching. So now we actually have a decent way to check to see what our scoring is doing. Now there is one more thing I want to add, but first let's make a group here and let's call this monster scoring. And let's put this in here, and then let's put this into our monster. And what I want to do here is I want to add a sub event for our score function. I'm going to hit B there. I'm going to go to our system, trigger once while true, only for our audio. I'm going to hit play, and then I'm going to play our monster points. I'm going to hit save. So now every time we cross that threshold with our bottom pipe, you see I died, but you could hear the point sound go off. Cool. Let me try not to die. Hold on. I can do this. Okay, you heard it once there. Hopefully you heard that enough times. But now we actually have to create the death event. We need a way for our player to actually die, and we need a way for our player to actually we need a way for it to kind of stop everything that's going on, because otherwise we're going to run into some issues here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually now update our death event. So let's go to our game function here. And on our death function, I want to have an update where I set our generation, our scrolling backgrounds, or a generation master to disabled. So let me do that. Let me go here. Let me say monster death add system and type in group active. And let me type in generation master. And let's see if this is going to work. I'm going to put this before the wait. I'm going to say deactivate. I'm going to hit OK because this is going to restart. So all of this will be reactivated and recreated when it restarts the layout. So now when I actually die, there we go. It pauses because it's completely deactivated. It's no longer scrolling. It's no longer creating new ones. I mean, that's why I was kind of thinking I should have this, because this is going to always control both of these versus control one of them. So this way it's not creating new ones and it's not scrolling. Otherwise you could just do it separately if you wanted to, but it might still create new ones and you don't really want that. All right, cool. So now we pretty much are done with our game here. We need to add 2 more things, and let's do that first. Let's go to our music folder. And let's right click and import some music. Let's add our music from Incompetech and hit import. And I actually had to export it to a wave, so I converted it to a wave, and you can find that in the resources zip, wherever that is in the description. And what we're going to do on our game start is we're just simply going to say audio play, just like we have been doing video dungeon boss, and we're going to put this down to like -10 decibels. That way it's not so loud. And we're going to hit looping and hit OK. So now this is like a 3-minute or 2.5-minute track, so I doubt anyone's going to really get to the entirety of the track. So you could kind of see if you wanted to put it to not looping, just to see if somebody reached the end of the song. That would be pretty impressive. But by having it as looping, which it should loop seamlessly, now we actually have a pretty much seamless game going on. So if I hit play again here, you can hear the music. It's a lot quieter, and I do that because sometimes the music is just too loud, and if you don't have any music options, then that's what you're going to want to do. All right, so we are ending our game here. We have one last thing that I like to implement into all of my games, and that is a flash effect. So let's go to our SFX layer. Let me lock our entities layer. Let's double click and add a new sprite, and let's color this in white. And let me actually bump the alpha up to 255. And what I want to do here is I want to make this sprite go over our entire canvas. So it's a little bit too large. I can make this a little bit smaller. And what I want to do, since we already set up our SFX layer, let me just call this object flash. And let me just lock this and check this box off, so that way I can see underneath it. That way it's not visible. Let me hit play. Let me make sure that we still have it as invisible. Cool, so that's there, but you don't know it's there. What we want to do is we want a way to actually call this as a function, and we want to know when we need to call it. We're going to need to call it when we actually collide, but what we want to do is we want to make a new game function. So let's do that. Let's double click, let's make a new function here, and let's call this SFX flash function. And let's hit OK. And where did that go? Went all the way down here. Let's put that in there. And what we want to do is we simply want to turn the visibility on and off. So let's add that. Let's go system, visibility, set layer visibility, and in this case we're going to type in :sfx like that, and we're going to make it visible. Then what we're going to do is we're going to wait. Now we want to wait a very short amount of time, so we're going to wait 0.06 seconds, and then we're actually going to control click this down and set it back to invisible. Now, this is going to work out really well, and I like adding these kind of effects to our game. I like to do that a lot, and there's a lot of other SFX that you can add, but what we're going to do is we're going to just call it when we collide, and we're not going to worry about any other SFX for that for right now. So we want to call this right here when we actually hit. Let's go to our function. Let's call the function SFX flash function, and let's put that on top. That way we call that first, and let's hit play. And let's see what happens. When I collide, cool. Kind of like an explosion almost. It's really effective, in my opinion. Okay, so that's it for all of our game events. We still have a few more things to add, and then I guess we could actually put this... Actually, I don't want to put this on the SFX layer. It doesn't really make sense. On our background layer, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a particle effect, and I think that that's going to just make our game a little bit nicer. And let me see what I want to do here. I want to double-click and add a new particle effect. And I want to make this really small. I want to make this like 16 by 16. I want to zoom in, and I want to take the paintbrush tool, and I want to change that size to be 16 as well. And I want to change it to be kind of like the orange torch in the background there. So I want this to be an orange color. I'm happy with that, like right there. I want to turn the alpha down. I'll put this to like 100, something like that. And I want to hit OK. And I just want to hit OK. I just want to click once with the paintbrush tool and then exit out. And now what I want to do is, you'll see here that I have this particle effect, and what I can do with it is pretty much limitless. But what I really want to do is I want to change the spray cone here. I want to put that to 180, and I want to rotate this kind of like this here, something like that, so it's flat. That should be pretty good here. Let's put this to... Put that to 280. No, not 280. 360. No, 180. There we go. No, not 180. 90. No, oh my god. Go the other way. I can do math. It's late. 270. Okay, 270. Once it's at 270, let's actually shrink this down a little bit. Let's say the rate of this is going to be not 50. We want to make it a smaller rate. Let me think what we want to do. We want to make this rate of 3. That way we only have a few objects going at a time. And then we want to change the speed of it to be not 200 pixels per second, but 100 pixels per second. We can actually leave the size as 32, even though our image is 16. That'll look pretty cool. And then here's the real big one that I want to add. I want to make sure that my grow rate is at -50. Now this is going to be the opposite grow rate as to what you might think. And this is actually going to make it kind of do this really cool warping effect, like it was actually a torch. So this is all good. Let me actually just take this diagonally and make this a little bit smaller so I can put this on top of our torch light right there. And let me just control click and put this over here as well, and hit save, and then let me hit play. And now in the background you can kind of see those circles moving. Let me move those up a little bit so they kind of look a little bit better. But you can always change the properties for both of them now that we actually have them there. And let me hit, I already hit play. Let me see if it'll pop up the second time here. There it goes. So cool. So now we actually have just some background noise going on, which I like to add as well. It's something cool that you can add. You can also change the particle rates. You can put it from 3 to 6. That might look a little bit better here. There we go. That does look a little bit better. And hopefully that'll kind of distract the user from actually trying to play the game, and they'll be like, oh, that torch is actually cool. It's a cool effect or something like that. So yeah, so that's what we're going to do there. We're going to actually go to our background layer now, and we're going to actually add an effect. Let's go to our effects on our background layer, and let's add the effect of blur horizontally. And we don't want to do it too much. I'm going to put it down to like 25 or something like that. Maybe I'll go for 50 just so you can see the effect. But now when I hit play, you can actually see that our background is nice and blurred, which will actually just kind of add to the depth, and it'll just kind of, it's hopefully there to just distract you less, and it's completely optional if you don't want to add that in. And then the last thing that I want to point out to you is that there are other effects that we can put just to the project, and I wanted to show you some really cool effect that would never really have a real sense of purpose here. But if I added the crystal ball effect and I added the scan lines effect, I really love how this looks. Let me hit play here, and it just looks so cool. I know we haven't really play tested our game other than this, but I think this just makes our game look so ridiculously cool. And I can actually mess around with our radius here, and I can put this to 100, so maybe you can actually see this a little bit better. It might be off screen. It is off screen. Let me put this to 75. This is just for fun. This is me just kind of having fun with this and messing around with some things. There you go. So you should be able to see that. I think this makes our game look so cool, and it's just something that you can do to add. And I can get rid of the crystal ball, and I can leave the scan lines. I can change the line height. Let me hit play there. Let me see what it looks like with some lines in there. I don't really like it with the scan lines without the crystal ball effect, so I'm going to get rid of that altogether. But you can also add maybe like a glow horizontal, and we can change the intensity of that to be like 10 or something like that, and hit play and mess around with cool stuff like that. And I know one other effect that I like to add is Vibrance. I like to add the Vibrance because it completely changes the color scheme, and it kind of makes it really vibrant, for lack of a better word. It kind of makes our colors pop a little bit more. But this is pretty much our Flappy Bird game. I hope that I've made it a lot easier and maybe more fun, and just kind of brought an updated version to it. There's still so many things you can add to this. You can add a high score table, you can add a menu, you can change the sprite font, which I did in my version, which you can play in the Skira arcade in the description below. There's a lot of things that you can really do to make this even more like Flappy Bird here. But I hope that this has given you a brief overview as to how we would do this. Your score should pretty much go up to 99,999 with no problem whatsoever. And by stretching it out, you should be okay with that. If you don't stretch it out like this, then the 10 and the 100 will get you won't be able to see it, essentially. So that's pretty much all I have for you on this Flappy Bird clone. I really do hope you enjoyed. I am Jeremy Alexander. Again, thank you so much for watching this video. If you do like it, leave it a thumbs up. And if you have any questions, maybe watch the video again. I know I went through a whole lot more than I usually do. Watch the video again first, and then if you do have more questions on it, just leave a comment and I'll be sure to get back to you as soon as I possibly can. As soon as I see it, feel free to tag me in it at Jerementor. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one.